Hello, everybody. Good morning. This is your host, Jordan Tremaine, and welcome to the Perspective Podcast, where we explore new thoughts, connect ideas, and offer new perspectives that may change the way you think about a thing or two. And today, we're going to talk about sanitation. All right. So this one, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because this one is a good one. I want to start off by saying that I listen to a podcast that is not mine called The Fundamentalists, and they had an episode called Engagement that I listened to, and this idea basically is going to be stolen from that podcast. But it is such a good idea, and it is such something that I think is worth spreading that I'm going to spend an entire episode talking about it today. So if you haven't tried listening to the Fundamentalist podcast, it's basically two guys that one's a super heady philosopher guy and one dude's a comedian that's getting a degree in like psychoanalysis, and they talk about stuff, and I really enjoy that podcast. So if you like this podcast, I feel like that kind of stuff would be right up your alley. It's Elliot Morgan and Peter Rollins are the two guys that are chatting it up. So, anyways, this idea of sanitation, I would say, please, if you're going to listen to this episode, listen to the whole episode and try and understand what I'm talking about. Try and get where I'm coming from before the harsh hammer of judgment falls down. This may be against what some people think or what some people believe, and I think it's going to be against what a lot of people hold as comforting, and that, in my mind, is the whole point of this podcast. Not to just make people uncomfortable, but to explore new thoughts and connect ideas and offer new perspectives. And it's a way to help us grow. It's a way to help us connect and understand other people, because the more different things we know, the more we're able to understand where people are coming from, the more we're able to connect, and the more we're able to just let other people be them and not say you have to be the way that makes me feel comfortable or else you're the enemy. It's like, no, you're allowed to be different, and I'm going to celebrate your differences. And some of the stuff annoys me, but I mean, you can't be everything that I love and nothing that I hate. Like, you're a regular person. So, that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, but in words that may, what's that word? Trigger? Yeah, I don't know. If you feel triggered by this, that's not my intention, but I can see how that would happen. So, yeah. Anyways, sanitation is this kind of secondary level of something I want to talk about. But today's episode is really about toxic relationships, or toxic people, or toxic traits, or whatever you want to say. And the core idea of today's episode is that any good relationship, any real relationship between two people is toxic. All good relationships between anybody are toxic. And that may sound strange, because I have heard a lot of stuff on the interwebs about, like, we need healthy relationships. I don't want to be in a toxic relationship. Oh, baby girl, that relationship's toxic. You need to get out of that. But I'm here to talk a different message. And I'm not saying that you should get beat up by your partner or they should put you down all the time. Like, there's stuff that's, like, actually dangerous. I don't think you should be in a dangerous relationship. What I mean by toxic is that if you're going to be in a relationship, and this could be a friendship, this could be a family relationship, this could be your significant other, this could even be your kids. If you're going to be in any type of relationship with any person, you're going to have to deal with that real person, how they are. And nobody's perfect. And because nobody's perfect, everybody has some toxic bullcrap about them. Some people are always late. Some people, they get jealous really easy. Some people do this. Some people do that. And I'm not saying you should never grow and you should never work on yourself. I think everybody should grow. Everybody should work on themselves. Real friends, real people in real relationships, I think we should help each other be the best version that we can be. But at the same time, we should accept in this moment who we are and who we are in relationship with. The whole person, the good and the bad, the for better and the for worse part, the richer and the poorer part. And that's the healthy and the toxic part. Everybody has toxic elements to them. And to ignore those toxic elements or to shame people or to try and fix them is not treating them like a real person. It's treating them like an idealized version of themselves. And it's kind of like saying, unless you act this way that I think is healthy, then I'm going to, there's going to be consequences. And I think that right there is the real toxic thing. To not allow people to be themselves, to not meet people where they're at. And, like, again, this is more for having sustainable or regenerative relationships where you can manage this. There's some things, like physically attacking other people when you get mad, that's dangerous. I'm thinking, in my mind, that's like a whole nother game. When I'm talking toxic, I'm talking like the way people think or some things they believe, or maybe you argue about stuff. And I'm not saying you have to stay in every relationship that's toxic and all toxic relationships are good. But every real relationship has some amount of imperfection. And it's up to you to understand what you can manage, what you can handle, what you're willing to work with, just like any other relationship. But for every relationship that you think you can manage or you can handle, or every relationship that you want to try, there's gonna be stuff that you don't like. There's gonna be toxic stuff. There's gonna be times where you disagree. And that is part of relationship. That is an important and never gonna go away part of relationship. There's never gonna be a person that always agrees with you. You don't even always agree with yourself. You have toxic elements. I have toxic elements. And I try to work on them. I try to learn about myself and grow. But that doesn't mean that I'm perfect and I'm going to become more perfect. Perfect means you don't need to change. You've already arrived, and there's nothing that needs to change or grow or upgrade about you ever again. Everybody is imperfect, and everybody can grow. And because of that, everybody can get better. And if we try to ignore this and say, like, I'm going to have a perfect relationship and it's going to be exactly the way that I fantasize, and if it's not that, then it's toxic. Or if my significant other doesn't do this, this, and this, or if they do this thing that I really don't like, that's toxic. Oh, that's not healthy. Everybody does unhealthy stuff. Some people smoke. Some people like to argue. Some people are gossips. Some people like to bottle up their emotions. Some people like to people please. I'm not saying any of these things are good, but all these things are real stuff that real people deal with. And being in relationship is about accepting people for who they are and helping them to get through their stuff, helping them to live their best life, sometimes calling them out on their bull crap and saying, like, yo, that wasn't cool. And that creates conflict. And that's not toxic. That's part of a relationship. But anyways, what I'm trying to get at in this episode is that all relationships are imperfect. To seek a perfect relationship is to seek to ignore the imperfections of the other person. And that's what I'm calling sanitation. It's where you take the person who definitely has toxic traits. Everybody has toxic traits because nobody's perfect. You take any person that you're trying to be in a relationship with, and you try to ignore, or you try to whitewash, or you try to sanitize. You try to cover them in hand sanitizer and like kill all the germs so that everything is perfect. And you try to sensationalize, which I did a previous episode on sensationalization. man, I can't even say that word right now, but it'll be in the description for this episode. Where you try to create this Instagram version of a relationship where everything's perfect. It's always romantic. He or she is always buying you stuff, or you're always going on adventures. No, you're gonna get in disagreements. They're gonna take the blanket off of you when it's really cold and you're both sleeping, and you're gonna be left in the bed like freezing cold. That's gonna happen. They're gonna eat. You're gonna have leftovers in the fridge, and you're gonna go to work, and you're gonna have an awful day at work, and you're going to be like, oh man, but I'm going to have really good leftovers because we went to my favorite place last night. And that's the thing that's holding you up through the day. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to get home to have my favorite leftovers. And you get home and they're not there. And you're like, yo, what's up with the leftovers? And they're going to be like, oh, I ate those this morning. That's going to happen. And it's not perfect. It's not what you like, but it's reality. And if you try to fight reality, reality's going to win. But to kind of like spoil that story, but I think that's part of the beauty of relationships, is navigating the imperfections and building a system that works despite the toxins. But when you try to sanitize, when you try to create this perfect version, I think that's what's actually toxic. That's what, when we're saying like, oh, that's a toxic relationship, you need to leave, like that's a dangerous thing to do. Because what you're doing, if you're trying to sanitize a situation, you're trying to ignore the toxic, or you're trying to like create this healthy relationship where there's no toxic stuff in it, you're ignoring the imperfections of the other person. And I'm not saying you should like embrace the imperfections and say like, this is great, you should stay like this, and I'm going to definitely deal with all the bullcrap you're feeding me. No, I'm not saying that. You should have boundaries, you should like do self-care, you should like take care of yourself and all that kind of stuff. But you should accept and acknowledge that this person has certain toxic qualities, and you should kind of talk to them and work with them and figure out a way that you guys can coexist, rather than ignoring them or shutting them down because you're like, oh, that's toxic, I can't deal with that, or you need to handle your stuff before you come and talk to me, as if you do that for everyone else, which you don't. Because most people, I would say everybody, is not fully aware of exactly who they are. They're not fully aware of everything that's toxic that they're doing. And so to put that on someone else and say like, oh, you need to be fully aware of who you are, and you need to fix all your stuff before you deal with me, or while you're dealing with me, you better act correct, you better come correct. That is what we call a double standard. That is what I would call unreasonable. And that, I would say, is actually toxic. That's bad. I would call that bad. So I think I'm using a word in a new sense, or in a non-popular sense. So it may be a little confusing that I'm bouncing back and forth between different meanings with certain words. So I hope this is clear. Even if it's making you uncomfortable, I hope that if you're listening and you're trying to understand, that the understanding is getting across. But basically, people are real. Reality is real. It's not a Disney movie. Happily Ever After still includes arguments. It still includes your car breaking down at 3 a.m. It still includes all the horrible things you hear about in real life, because it's real. And to try and get rid of that, or try to sweep it under the rug, or put it in a closet, or bottle it up, it's gonna come out. Like when people, like companies that do stuff, they create toxins, or they create like hazardous waste, and then they just try to bury it somewhere or put it in a landfill. Over time, that stuff builds up, and then it creates a huge problem because we ignored it. The reason that there was a problem was because we ignored it. If we would have dealt with it and like, okay, this is bad, how do we deal with this? How do we do this safely? How do we manage this? Then we could have ended up in a better spot, instead of like, oh, let's just dump this in the river because nobody's looking. Or, oh, let's just bury this over here. Just like, deal with your problems. Deal with reality. It's very difficult. I'll raise my hand. I'll be the first to tell you that dealing with reality is uncomfortable a lot of the times, because it's not what you like. It's what's happening. And if you can do that, I think there's a lot of benefits to it. If you cannot do that, there may seem like there's a lot of benefits because nothing is going wrong right now. Oh, I buried the hazardous waste over there. I can't see it. No harm, no foul. So you don't really see anything that's going wrong. But over time, that stuff's going to bubble up. It's going to start infecting the environment. And then you're like, that stuff can run deep. It could get deep inside the core of where you put it. And in the case of burying hazardous waste, it could ruin a forest for 100 years. And in the case of sweeping stuff under the rug or ignoring stuff or trying to sanitize stuff in a relationship, it could seem all good right now. The pictures on Instagram can seem really good, but it can corrupt the foundation and the core of the relationship to ignore those things, and it could create bitterness, and it could create resentment, and these kind of things that can last for years and years after the relationship breaks up, which is toxic. So I would say, deal with people, accept people as best you can, and try to work with them. Because if you can't, I did this episode called The Reality Filter that helps explain kind of what I'm talking about right now, where if you try to ignore the reality of what's going on, there's going to come a situation where you have to run up into reality. You're going to get a reality check. And if you don't have enough reality in your bank account, that check's going to bounce. And it's not fun to get bounced. It's not fun to be at the grocery store with a grocery cart full of groceries, and then you write a check and they're like, oh, we can't accept this. You can't take these groceries. That's not fun. So I would say I'm just a very big advocate of treating people like real people, accepting that people aren't perfect, not like shaming them all the time for who they are, but really saying like, who are you? And if you can trust each other enough to say who you are, then say, okay, well, now that we know what's up and we know the truth, then let's try to make a plan. And I think that's great. I think that's beautiful, and I think that's how you create like super dope relationships, and also how you heal. You heal through the truth. You create toxins and make more toxic stuff through lying and sweeping under the rug and throwing more skeletons in the closet. Your closet can only hold so many skeletons. So there's going to get to the point where if that's what you do every time you get a skeleton you throw in the closet, it's going to get full and it's going to like bust open and you're going to have skeletons everywhere. And it's going to be like, man, this is like a boneyard. But, yeah, so that's the basic idea. I hope you guys aren't too offended by this. If you are, okay, I'm not trying to offend you. I hope this is something you can listen to and take, and hopefully it helps you improve your life, or you can use this idea to see dynamics that are going on in different relationships around you and stuff like that. But yeah. That's the basic concept of sanitation. So this has been the Perspective Podcast episode on sanitation. I would say if this is something that's sparking your curiosity, go back and listen to the Sensationalism. I figured out how to say it. And the Reality Filter podcasts. But other than that, whatever kind of day that you're having today while you're listening to this, I hope it's a real day, because I am a big fan of reality and trying to meet people where they're at, and that includes yourself. Meet yourself where you're at. Understand who you are, accept who you are. It really helps you be you. Like, be yourself. Accept who you are and accept what kind of day you had. Don't try to force yourself to have a good day if you're not having a good day. I mean, try to have a good day, but like, if it's not going well, accept it. I think that's part of being human, is not always living in this blissful, great, everything's awesome state all the time. You have to have darkness so you can have light, kind of thing. But yeah, I hope you have a real day, and I hope this concept of sanitation turns into a good conversation for you somewhere down the road. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one.